Hello, everybody. This is a Globe Earth public announcement from yours truly, John Christopoulos, the Morgile. Good evening, friends, subscribers, ladies, gentlemen, and the occasional curious sheeple. No offense to the sheeple. We were all sheeple at some point in our lives, to be fair. The aim of this public service announcement is to give all of you a chance to shed your long-held, rather absurd, illogical belief systems. Please understand that the goal of this announcement is not to change your mind about anything, rather to merely help you or urge you to consider ideas which you may have never considered, logically or skeptically or at all. There's no harm in skeptically analyzing a theory. However, it is extremely dangerous to ignore or ridicule new ideas or theories that don't jive with our accepted version of reality. That indeed can be very dangerous and is indeed the opposite of science. Now, I'll give you an example. Before the Wright brothers flew an airplane for the first time about 114 years ago, the general consensus of the scientific community was that it was a laughable waste of time trying to build a flying machine, right? Only birds are meant to fly, duh, you stupid science-denying idiots, you Wright brothers, you. Of course, they lived up to their name, indeed. So the Wright brothers were right. They were correct after all. And it turns out that the science-denying idiots happened to be the majority, if not the entirety, of the scientific community. How ironic is that? Now, that's just one example. There's probably many more that we could point, but just, manned flight is a real good one that's, sort of, maybe within the realm of some of your grandparents that are still living. So that's just in the last 114 years, one example of how science was totally wrong, and they mocked and ridiculed actual scientists as science-denying idiots. Sound familiar? Well, that all changed in terms of the scientific community, calling the Wright brothers science-denying idiots, of course, and actual science has launched aviation technology extremely rapidly in such a short period of time. It's truly amazing how fast the entire world's paradigm can change with one single advent, such as manned flight, which we now take for granted. Now, there are tons of other examples where everyone in the world thought an idea was absurd, not worth the time to consider, preposterous folly, only to find out later, sometimes literally overnight, like in the case of the Wright brothers, that they, the scientific community, were 100% incorrect. Now, as you can imagine, this was rather an embarrassment to the entire scientific community at large in terms of the Wright brothers and other examples that you can cite. It's important for you to consider that the modern prevailing overall paradigm of the world and the so-called universe can in fact be shown to be completely misaligned with observable, testable reality. If this is the first time that you've looked into this topic, it's really important to suspend all of the fundamental premises regarding the world and the universe that you may have, just for argument's sake. In order to fall on the right side of history, if for no other reason than due diligence, we must skeptically scrutinize the belief system installed into our subconscious minds via the federally mandated educational curriculum, which is essentially uniform worldwide. Now, I can guarantee you that the revelation that you're about to receive, if you haven't, gotten this yet, this will change the trajectory of your life and of the entire world culture to such a degree that it will make the Wright brothers' advent of aviation totally pale in comparison. So please try not to be one of those people who told the Wright brothers they were science-denying idiots because they were building a flying machine, because we all know only birds were meant to fly, right? So this topic will require you to commit yourself to skeptically and objectively researching, re-examining, reconsidering your belief system about pretty much everything you think you know about theoretical physics, geometry, geology, and ultimately our true place in the universe. However, you must do so from an unbiased position and honestly, skeptically compare data in two opposing models of the world. So, in other words, data can be interpreted in multiple models, and only one of the models can be true or correct. The other one must be wrong. So the ancient Greeks are often quoted as proving or cited as proving the Earth was a sphere thousands of years ago, even though America hadn't been discovered and there were no globes back then. People were thinking about this. Truth be told, they apparently came up with such a theory around 300 BC. But it's important to keep in mind that this theory was certainly not widely believed worldwide or even Greece-wide until millennia later. And the first globe wasn't created until the late 1400s when Columbus, accidentally discovered America when he was looking for India. And people still to this day call Native Americans or the different tribes of Native Americans Indians, right? So the point being is there have been many different models of the world and the celestial lights, also known as the stars and the wandering stars or the planets, and many different versions of each model, which, can indeed adequately track so-called orbital patterns of planets based on long-term meticulous astronomical observations, which are assigned mathematical values. But a lot of people get confused and think that the cycles of the heavens are somehow beholden to our mathematical values that we've simply ascribed to the observations. Now, again, for example, like orbital periods of Jupiter, this didn't come from people writing things down on paper to figure it out. It came from long-term meticulous astronomical observation, documentation, and even confirmation of a repeating cycle. For example, again, the orbital period of Jupiter was tracked and predicted based on a geostationary, geocentric model by multiple astronomers prior to Galileo or Kepler or whoever. Two would be Ptolemy and Aryabhata. One was from Greece, one was from the Middle East, India, I believe. So, finally, if you are a troll in my comments section, which there are tons of you, or maybe a couple of you with tons of accounts, but if you're one of those trolls in my comments section spouting never-ending cycles of dull insults and mindless semantic arguments to the evidence we're about to reveal, I would really appreciate logical examination of the subject and evidence as opposed to your ignorant mockery and blindness so severe it's as if your eyes have been gashed out. And I know that you're not going to actually do this, but I hope and pray that, maybe one or two of you will. Now, you trolls out there are the people whom history is going to laugh about in the upcoming years, and actually would have been mobbed in years past, which is why you hide behind hundreds of dummy accounts, spending hours upon hours, days upon days, never-ending cycle of commenting on videos which you claim to think are stupid. Honestly, why would anyone in their right mind spend so much time and energy and effort on a topic that they feel is one for retarded morons? Doesn't make any sense to me. So please don't be a science-denying idiot who will be laughed at by all future generations, and please try to be a bit more open-minded and intuitive for the duration of this video. So if you could please not be one of those people who called the Wright brothers science-denying idiots, if you will. So, since we mentioned the Wright brothers so much in the opening of this, the key they found to a machine that flies is the shape of the wing, which manipulates the air in such a way that at high speeds, the air passes across the top of the wing more swiftly than the air below the wing, hence creating pressure and lift. Now, once in the air, the vessel travels along a single plane if unmanipulated or disturbed, hence the name airplane. So you could almost say that the plane is swimming through the air, although swimming is sort of a bad example or analogy, as aerodynamics have advanced to the degree to greatly reduce drag, increase thrust, and create flying machines which can exceed the speed of sound by many times. Now, imagine what the world would be like today if those two dudes, the Wright brothers, decided to be the typical douchey sheeple sort who sat around laughing at others, how silly they were to try and, build a flying machine. Ha ha ha, science-denying idiots. Birds were meant to fly. So, now with this precept in mind, if you're like most people, in the world, you believe that you live stuck to the side of a spinning sphere in outer space, flying through an infinite universe round the sun, round the galaxy, round the great attractor, as a result of the Big Bang Theory and random chance coincidence. Now, let's examine each of those quickly. For starters, what first-hand evidence do you have for any of these beliefs? Again, you live on a spinning sphere in outer space, flying through an infinite universe as the result of the Big Bang Theory and random chance and coincidence, all governed by gravity and chaos. What first-hand evidence do you or does anyone have for these beliefs? I'm here to tell you that you believe these things on strictly faith in scientism alone. Now, sure, we've all seen the obviously fake pictures from NASA or LIGO about gravity or the spinning sphere Earth, but that isn't first-hand evidence. If we assume that NASA or LIGO would never lie and we believe everything that they purport, then we're not being skeptical, but in fact we're being the exact opposite of skeptical. Honestly, there is no first-hand evidence any honest person can point to in order to show the Earth to be spherical or spinning or any of that. You may point to the apparent motion of the moon or the stars or the sun and say, but those are spherical, therefore our world must be spherical. To many, this appears to be very clear proof of the spherical Earth. However, these celestial bodies are simply not the Earth, and in fact nothing like the Earth whatsoever. Even if the sun or the moon are indeed spherical, so we'll just go ahead and say that the sun and moon are spherical, okay? Even if that's the case, it shows nothing about the shape of the Earth and proves nothing about the shape of the Earth. This would be like you, me, and 5 friends sitting in a room looking out the window, and we see 7 geese fly by the window. By the same logic, you, me, and our 5 friends must also be 7 geese flying past a window, relative to the other geese, of course. This is obviously a preposterous, logically fallacious leap of confirmation bias, as you simply cannot point to a distant object, which we really don't know much about, in all honesty. You can't point to that object or objects, however distant they may be, and claim that they prove anything about the world that you happen to be standing upon. Now, I realize that this can be difficult to fathom, but for the sake of argument, please consider the hypothesis that infinite space doesn't exist and the world is a static plane, where the lights in the sky are actually above us. Yes, there is up and down, and the stars and the sun and the heavenly bodies that you can see in the night are above us. It is the stars and or the ether that are spinning, and this has been proven time and time again throughout the history that it is the stars and or the ether that are spinning while the Earth remains at rest, complete rest, without axial rotation, without orbital motion, and certainly without any sort of inverse square curvature to result in an overall sphere. Okay, so this might seem like a bit much at once, but let me just put it right out there so as to save time. Consider the following data skeptically and with an open mind, assuming 2 models. Again, a flat stationary Earth and a spinning spherical Earth flying through space in multiple directions simultaneously at varying speeds. Now, the data is very simple. What goes straight up must come straight down. Now, the models we're considering today are A, the Earth is a spinning sphere, or B, the Earth is a stationary plane. Now, I'm not going to try to sway you in any way on this, nor am I going to belabor the point, as I have covered in depth in several other video series, and I'll put some links and cards in here so that you can find them easily. I want you to consider, for argument's sake, and be honest, which model does this data, again, what goes straight up must come straight down, align with more logically? And I don't want to hear about gravity, as gravity is a theoretical acceleration due to a massive warping of space-time, which is exactly a vacuum. Gravity has been debunked a zillion different ways. I won't get into all of that here, but you can watch my series playlist, The Fallacy of Gravity, for detailed analysis and information on the disproofs of gravity. Now, if you're new to this, or if you're a troll, and you've heard this before yet continue arguing your ridiculous position ad nauseum just for the sake of argument, circular argument no less, Or if you have simply failed to skeptically weigh the data in both models fairly, you're unfortunately and unwittingly programmed to revert into an offensive mode to preserve your paradigm and rebut this data with something like, duh, haven't you ever heard of gravity? Geez, you dumbass, everyone knows gravity causes objects to fall. Well, ask yourself this. What is gravity?
What is gravity?
I have no idea. Okay, next question.
And by the way, this is called gravity.
Neil, I gotta say, you're totally blowing my mind right now.
That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch.
If you honestly claim to understand how gravity works, then you believe that the so-called fabric of space-time, which actually doesn't exist, and even if it did exist, is supposedly comprised of exactly a void, a vacuum, nothing. You believe this absence of everything is warped and bent around the spherical Earth, causing a sort of surface tension, if you will, or ripples through space, which is nothing, described as an acceleration towards the very center of the allegedly spherical Earth. Now, keep in mind, space-time is claimed to be comprised of an extremely high vacuum in the prevailing model of the universe. Now, ask yourself, how is it possible for an extremely high vacuum to cause any force being displaced, let alone connect the Earth to the Sun from almost 100 million miles away? Again, a vacuum is a void. It is nothing. It is nada, zilch, zero. So we're expected to believe that nothing, a vacuum, is pushing down with so much force that the upper atmosphere exists adjacent to it, to the vacuum of space. Single molecules of disparate low-density gases are being held to the Kármán line adjacent to such a vacuum by nothing more than theoretical gravity being pushed in by a vacuum. Really? Be honest with yourself. Does this make any sense whatsoever, considering the laws of fluid dynamics? And if you're not familiar with the laws of fluid dynamics, look into it. But a vacuum displaced by the mass of the Earth simply could not create enough force to supposedly hold you and the oceans, not the hummingbirds, and the gases far in the atmosphere adjacent to such a powerful vacuum, stuck to the side of a spinning sphere, racing east in terms of spin over 1,000 miles near the equator, vertically falling along that curve at 135 miles an hour compared to a tangent line from the base point. Not only does gravity do all that, but gravity allegedly binds moons to planets, planets to stars, stars to galactic center, and the galaxy to the great attractor, with exactly zero evidence that the theory is correct, and a mountain of evidence proving that the theory of gravity is irrelevant and actually incorrect. Completely incorrect. Theoretical folly. Yes, whether you like it or believe it or not, gravity still to this day remains strictly in the realm of theory and has indeed been shown to be false. Now, taxpayer black hole projects such as LIGO recently claimed to have discovered gravity waves. However, what they discovered was, quote, a signal which was represented as time went forward, this frequency went up. A pretty simple signal. The scientists at LIGO went through the data and convinced themselves that it was gravitational waves and presented that not one, but two real computer simulations. I guess that's why they call them LIGO. Now, honestly, how can a scientist responsible for operating a multi-billion-dollar lie factory literally present a definite oxymoron as somehow scientific evidence? I mean, how the heck can you call something a real simulation and point to that as proof of your theory? The two terms, real and simulation, are actually opposites and mutually exclusives, and the term a real simulation is certainly the definition of an oxymoron. Either something is real or it is a simulation. Simulation is the opposite of real, and this guy that's presenting the gravitational waves from LIGO is an overpaid liar. And this so-called proof we have of gravity, Now, I must always make this disclaimer because some people are new to this every day, but I'm not arguing the fact that what goes up will come down, rather arguing the theory that the cause of this is due to a vacuum pressing against our atmosphere because the mass of the Earth displaces theoretical space-time, causing a so-called gravity well made out of exactly diddly squat. Okay, that's what I'm saying doesn't exist, is that gravity. Now, if you know diddly squat about fluid dynamics or even static electric charge that is held by the Earth, you know that a vacuum simply cannot exist adjacent to a pressurized environment without a sturdy structure separating the two areas. Now, as the bizarre, nonsensical religion of scientism piles theory on top of theory, on top of assumption, on top of conjecture, on top of so-called laws, such as the Copernican principle, and fail to consider the obvious fact that the world is a stationary plane, this labels all modern theoretical physicists as the opposite of scientists. Now, what goes up must come down is easily explained by natural density and buoyancy in the stationary plane Earth model, which is ultimately governed by the static electric charge of the Earth itself. What goes up must come down has nothing to do with gravity, which is a mass hysteria, a figment of the collective imagination. On the other hand, if you're not a globe Earth troll, then you are probably like most people and you simply haven't been presented with or considered the evidence showing that the Big Bang, heliocentric, galactic cosmology of the cosmos is a steaming pile of garbage, based on nothing more than conjecture and a great deal of posturing and herd mentality in terms of the peer-reviewed community. Now, this is not a simple claim of mine. If you take the time to consider the following evidence, and evidence that I'm going to link up in here, because you can't go over all of it in 50 hours. There's just too much evidence disproving the heliocentric model and showing the Earth to be a stationary plane. But if you look into this and do your due diligence and try to get rid of your confirmation bias and set aside your preconceived notions for argument's sake, an honest person will quickly realize that the spinning sphere Earth heliocentric model is physically impossible. For so many reasons, it's impossible to know where to begin or name them all. I will begin with the simple, bold claim that the world lacks all inverse square curvature, which this one alone disproves the heliocentric model by the way, as well as the Earth lacks axial rotation. And again, this one single fact independently disproves the heliocentric model, rendering the world the very contrary to a spinning sphere. So to reiterate, if there's no curvature to the Earth, nor is the Earth spinning, then by definition it is categorically not a spinning sphere. The amount of evidence to back these claims is enormous, and the burden of proof is on globbers to show evidence for these two basic tenets of globism. Again, simple curvature, 8 inches per mile squared, and axial rotation, 1,000 plus miles an hour at the equator and 0.0 miles an hour at the pole, just for starters. Now, I'm going to kindly ask you all, again, to temporarily disregard everything you believe you know about space and astronomy, and, I thought I knew a whole lot about that until about 2 years ago, until I looked at this evidence. But I really just hope that you're able to sort of suspend that for argument's sake, as you've never been to space, you've never seen the spherical Earth with your own eyes, you've seen forged pictures from NASA, and in fact NASA has been caught lying since their inception, starting back in the 50s when they literally smuggled Nazi scientists into the United States illegally and without the permission of Congress and without the understanding of the U.S. citizens. They smuggled Nazi scientists to help spearhead the propaganda campaign known as NASA through clandestine operations like Paperclip and bold-faced hoaxes like the Apollo missions or the Pioneer 10 mission to Jupiter in the early 70s. Now, NASA has been caught faking pretty much everything, and they're still up to their dirty old tricks, planning a trip to Mars in another 20 or 50 years, just like they've been doing since the 60s, increasing their annual funding every year. This year, for fiscal year 2017, they're actually getting $20 billion in U.S. tax dollars. And, let's not forget the millions of problems we've pointed out about the ISS and spacewalks, complete with air bubbles in space, scuba divers in official spacewalk video caught on live spacewalks, and even near drownings in space with NASA using snorkels to save their astronauts in space. Spacewalks are obviously hooked on Earth in a large pool which houses an exact replica of the ISS design, and they are certainly not in space, being underwater on Earth. NASA's evidence must be ignored as obvious forgery in order to begin to understand the deception, and it's very important to go with the assumption that NASA is not to be trusted about pretty much anything, and ditto for all the other countries with so-called space programs, who all happen to be members of the Antarctic Treaty, which is another thing that I urge everyone to look into and consider it with the evidence that was purported by Admiral Richard Byrd after his trip to the Antarctic in the early 50s. So, another good place to begin showing you that the Earth is not a spinning sphere is simple observation and documentation of the North Pole star Polaris, which remains fixed in essentially the same spot overnight, and from season to season, and from year after year, and through the centuries, and through the millennia. Polaris is unique in this regard, and if you actually test this factual data against the heliocentric hypothesis, this observation is simply incompatible with the heliocentric model for multiple reasons. Polaris is claimed to be 433.8 light years away, and globbers use this distance to make the claim that since the star is so far away, our measly alleged orbit around the sun doesn't cause any parallax change. However, this argument falls flat on its face under logical scrutiny, as the proofs we're going to cover have really nothing to do with stellar parallax, even though we should technically see major stellar parallax over time due to the major disparity in distance between the nearest visible star versus the furthest visible stars in the heliocentric model. But anyway, this has nothing to do with stellar parallax. When you understand that Polaris remains fixed in the same spot from any point in the northern hemisphere, even documented as visible as far south as the Tropic of Capricorn, through the course of an evening, the observer doesn't have to move their telescope. However, they should technically be facing in opposite directions in space due to traveling along a 12,500 mile curve during the surface, round the surface of the Earth, over the course of an evening, meaning north would be opposite directions facing in space from dusk until dawn for a single stationary observer with a scope fixed on Polaris. Now, you can fairly easily triangulate Polaris based on this principle, disproving the notion that it's hundreds of light years away, even humoring the heliocentric model, assuming that between those 2 points you have a 4,000 mile radius. You can triangulate on that pretty easily. Now, furthermore, 6 months later, Polaris can still be seen in the exact same spot without moving your telescope a smidgen, meaning Polaris must be traveling billions of light years through space in order to remain fixed above our measly, arbitrary polar axis if the heliocentric model was correct, which it isn't. Now, this has nothing to do with the distances allegedly traveled around the galaxy or sun, but instead of the angle of north being a constantly changing angle into space from a stationary observer on the Earth. Now, you also have the phenomenon of the precession of the equinoxes, which is a 26,000 year cycle that has never been verified. However, the precession of the equinox dictates that the axis of the Earth should move 1 degree along its course of precession every 72 years, I believe. Now, this means we should constantly have new North Stars, humoring the heliocentric model, frequently and constantly changing throughout history, yet we're stuck with Polaris right there above the axis for all of recorded history. Furthermore, Polaris has been reported as visible as far south of Capricorn, which is geometrically impossible on a globe with the given proportions. Now, scientists claim that there used to be a different North Star back in the Egyptian days. However, this is a ridiculous claim, as a single degree change in the alleged axis of rotation every 72 years would render the North Star a constantly changing star, yet it never does move a smidgen, disproving the idea that the Earth's wobble causes the precession of the equinoxes. Now, again, these are major changes in angles of our line of sight or the line of our axis, and it has nothing to do with stellar parallax. Now, the precession of the equinoxes, again, supposedly takes about 26,000 years, and it's important to remember that people in modern history have only been tracking this cycle for just a few thousand years at the very most. Now, there is circumstantial evidence that the ancient Maya and possibly Vedic cultures had traditions of stargazers who noticed patterns over tens of thousands of years, and all of the ancient cultures were using flat, stationary, local geocentric cosmology as opposed to heliocentric infinite space cosmology. Modern science poo-poos the idea that civilizations such as the Maya could have lasted tens of thousands of years. However, their calendar does show evidence that their civilizations were indeed tracking cycles of the heavens for up to 50,000 years. Now, I'm not going to make that claim, but it is sort of interesting if you look into the Mayan long count calendars. And as a matter of fact, their calendars are more precise than our modern calendars, if you want to know the truth. They didn't have to worry about leap year, they didn't have to worry about daylight savings, because they were correct in their model, actually. Now, since we're on astronomy, another huge blow to the heliocentric model is the fact that the phases of the moon do not jive whatsoever with the heliocentric layout. Since the moon is alleged to orbit along the ecliptic plane once per month, and the ecliptic plane is the same plane that the Earth allegedly orbits the sun around, although the moon is slightly offset to the ecliptic plane by a mere 5 degrees, which is not a wide divergence at all. Now, at any rate, what this means is that the full moon should always be on the outside edge of the Earth's path around the sun, hypothetically, meaning that the full moon phenomenon would simply never be visible during the day. The full moon is very often seen during the day. As a matter of fact, I saw it for myself on August 18th and 19th of 2016, and this completely disproves the heliocentric model altogether. On the other hand, the phases of the moon leading up to and away from no moon, so, the crescent moon, the crescent type moon phases, waning away to no moon and then waxing back to crescent, that part of the cycle of the moon's orbit should always be on the day side of the Earth, yet we often see these crescent moon phases in the middle of the night. These two basic observations demolish the heliocentric model completely, and until you can actually look at this topic objectively and do away with the programming you've been indoctrinated with for your entire life, you will be a science-denying idiot and a religious zealot, devout in the cult of scientism, and yes, you will be just like the people who told the Wright brothers they were science-denying idiots. Denying science means to be ignorant of data and refusing to consider hypothesis. That is a science-denying idiot. Now, another observation of celestial bodies which debunks the heliocentric premise involves the equatorial stars, which are visible from somewhere on Earth from season to season. Now, since the Earth allegedly orbits the Sun at a 60-degree angle to the solar plane, so here's the solar plane, here's the ecliptic, we don't just go around the Sun like this, it's at an angle to the path of the Sun. The visible stars overhead from the equator during the winter should be, northwest of the galactic equator, while the visible stars overhead from the equator during the summer should be southeast of the galactic equator. The simple fact is we can see hundreds and hundreds of the same stars and constellations from season to season to season to season, year after year, from somewhere on Earth, and that would be physically impossible in the heliocentric model due to the situation involved with the model itself. Again, we're not talking about parallax, we're talking about facing that way in the summer and facing that way in the winter in terms of looking at the night sky, especially at stars above the equator. The fact that we can see all of the same stars from season to season debunks the heliocentric model completely. And again, I will say this has nothing to do with motion through space, although it should, that we should see changes in relative positions in stars due to motion through space, but this is not the point. It has to do with our visible line of sight towards space is constantly changing, even over the course of an evening, over the course of a season to season to season, yet the stars are not unique from season to season. I suggest you check out at least one or two of my documentary series proving this stuff more in depth. I hope you've got some time to spend on it. My most recent documentary series is over 7 hours long, but it's cut up into 5 sections so you can do it at your leisure. I suggest that you definitely look into this if you're interested in understanding the truth, because it has been proven, the jury's out, there's no longer a debate, it's just a matter of getting people to look at the evidence. Anyway, I'm not going to try to go too in-depth into all of the proofs because this is just a public service announcement to get your attention and hopefully get you to look into this more deeply. Links will be in the description box and cards will be in the upper corner of your screen for your convenience. Now, another major problem with constellations is the fact that the entire universe is supposed to have sprung from a massive, mysterious, coincidental, unproven explosion, yet throughout all of recorded history there hasn't been one single iota in change in terms of the relative position or distances between the stars, and we find these allegedly hyperfast objects traveling in contrary directions allegedly never appear to move relative to one another throughout history and make perfect cycles around our point of observation, returning to their exact point in space over the course of a year, every year, for all of history. Now, of course, you do have this, alleged 26,000-year cycle of the precession of the equinoxes, but this is absolutely incompatible with the heliocentric model, considering, as I mentioned, that the North Star has never moved, meaning that our axis doesn't wobble, as they claim, which is supposedly causal of the precession of the equinoxes. Now, if these astronomical proofs are a bit boring or a bit too much, here's something simple. Prove curvature of standing water over 50 miles. Every physical experiment ever conducted to prove whether or not the expected inverse square curvature exists over long stretches of standing water always, never fails to come back with data showing that standing water and flat areas of land, such as Kansas, are indeed flat. Actually, a geodetic survey was done of Kansas, and they found that it was, quote, flatter than a pancake. Now, let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen a pancake that is a hump, the summit of which is 15,000 feet taller than the portions 150 miles in either direction? So, flat as a pancake means a hump nearly 3 miles tall, right? That makes perfect sense. Same thing goes for the sea or standing water, which is actually a much better indicator of curvature or lack thereof, since water always finds its level, and even Kansas has a few dips and hills and valleys. Sea level is actually sea level. It's not a mean curve, as believed by globbers, but the gosh darn sea is actually level, from coast to shining coast, all over the world. Now, there may be small differences in sea level depending on atmospheric pressure or barometric pressure, but for the most part, the oceans of the world are certainly not wrapped around a sphere, spinning around in space whatsoever. Now, lots of pro-globe scientists try to prove axial rotation using experiments with lights, including Airy's failure using starlight, Michelson-Morley-Michelson-Gale using laser lights in a lab, the Sagnac experiment, in all of these cases, and really much to their dismay because they wanted to prove axial rotation, they repeatedly proved the world to be stationary, which is why physicists never learn about these experiments in their, education, or indoctrination really is the best word. But yeah, they prove the world to be stationary, and it is the light coming down from the stars which is moving. Physical experiments, not even involving light, also show the world to be stationary. For example, this is one of my favorites. This is something that I've been talking about since really day one. It was something that I figured out when I was 11 and didn't realize it. But a flight from LA to New York is often identical in duration to its return flight. Now, this might not seem too odd at first, but if you think about this logically for 10 seconds, westbound flights should always face one hell of a headwind, admittedly, yet the destination should be racing towards the nose of the plane as the plane races towards the destination. Eastbound flights are racing against the destination, yet the duration of these two flights is often identical. People argue that the westbound plane continues spinning east with the Earth as it takes off and accelerates west. This is so preposterous as it's wholly illogical, but it violates one of the basic laws of motion, which states an object in motion will tend to maintain its velocity until enacted upon by some other force. Now, obviously, we can consider multiple jet engines attached to a free-flying vessel not attached to the ground in any way as some other force, and there's no possible way that a plane can be traveling west at high velocities and traveling east at high velocities at the same time. You can't have it both ways. Now, the simple fact that said flights are often identical in duration, again, from New York to LA and LA to New York, irrefutably proves the supposed supersonic axial rotation of the Earth and the atmosphere attached to it, allegedly. None of this spinning simply it just doesn't exist. I suppose I should mention that the eastbound flight back to New York would have technically 1,000-mile-per-hour tailwind as a rule. However, it would still be racing against the destination, yet the two flights are often identical in duration. Now, I should also mention that westbound flights simply do not encounter 1,000-mile-per-hour headwinds as a rule, nor do eastbound flights experience such tailwinds as a rule, so the notion that the Earth is spinning and the atmosphere is tattooed to the Earth beneath, and the planes are magically tattooed to the atmosphere, constantly changing their frame of reference with the ground beneath them by the atmosphere, this whole idea is a load of rubbish. Otherwise, we would see 1,000-mile-per-hour headwinds for westbound planes and 1,000-mile-per-hour tailwinds for eastbound planes, which we simply do not observe in reality ever. I've mentioned this before, but the fastest winds ever recorded are 302 miles per hour, and that is in a tornado. So what makes this even more irrational is the fact that eastbound flights are often or sometimes slightly faster than the westbound flights, which is completely counterintuitive. It's the opposite of what you'd expect and is incompatible with the idea that the Earth and all the destinations are spinning east, while the planes would be traveling independent of the ground below under their own propulsion and guidance. If these arguments are still too much to get you thinking, try thinking back when you were younger and some adult showed you a globe. Maybe it was your parents, maybe it was your teacher, but they do get you young with the globe, so maybe you don't remember it at all. But some of you may remember that they told you that we all lived on a spinning ball in outer space. One of your first questions may have been about Australia, because that was what was right in the book for us to ask anyway. I remember that actually. But the answer is our first introduction into the theory of gravity. The people in Australia are not upside down, but according to the illegitimate propped up, but because of gravity, we all live on top of the world. Well, teacher, what is gravity? Well, that's a bit advanced, but according to the illegitimate propped up failure of a patent clerk named Albert Schilstein, space and time are the fabric which make up the void of the universe. So you're saying the vacuum of space is a fabric made up of space and time? Yes, pretty much. So since the Earth is so big, it creates a huge warp in this theoretical fabric of space-time, essentially displacing space-time, a vacuum, nothing, causing a sort of surface tension towards the Earth, causing the acceleration of gravity at about 9.8 meters per second squared. So, where's the evidence for this space-time? Well, Einstein is always right. Duh. Really, but if space-time exists in the vacuum or void of space, and our world warps space-time, then how does our atmosphere remain adjacent to an infinite vacuum? And how does a vacuum push against anything to create any sort of acceleration? Gravity must be really strong. Well, no, actually, according to physics, gravity is the weakest of the natural forces. I believe they have it as 10 to the 0 power with an infinite reach. Now, forgive me if I'm wrong, but 10 times 0 is 0. So I don't know how they figured that. But anyway, so you're telling me that gravity is strong enough to hold a single molecule of an extremely light gas directly adjacent to an infinite vacuum and subsequently add to the 14.7 pounds of pressure per square inch of, barometric pressure, which we experience near the ground in the troposphere. The whole gravity thing doesn't seem to make much sense to a 7-year-old. but it must be true because this whole globe thing relies on all this theory just to work hypothetically, and all of the scientists and teachers in the world are obviously much smarter than a pack of toddlers. The sad thing is, all of these scientists were unfortunately indoctrinated themselves as toddlers and never stopped to measure for curvature or axial rotation of the Earth, just for starters. Everyone just assumes that such things exist ever since they were toddlers. See, that's the sort of beauty, if you will, for lack of a better word, but that's the beauty of the Great Deception. Everyone believes it. And only the only people who ever skeptically consider or rebut the spinning Earth idea are gullible toddlers who are typically not very good with logical debates. Now, ditto goes for the theoretical astrophysicists, and I can tell you that from firsthand experience when I debated Dr. Josh Grindley in August 5th, August 8th of 2015 on the Art Bell Show, Midnight in the Desert. Believe it or not, I was just 4 months into being a flat earther or a static planar. I actually won the debate by default because the Harvard astrophysicist on NASA's payroll folded halfway through the debate and never offered any actual proof of a spherical spinning Earth other than Apollo astronauts. Oh, and the Red Bull jump with Felix Baumgartner, where they obviously used fisheye lenses to create the illusion of curvature at over 100,000 feet, and yet the Harvard-trained, NASA-paid astrophysicist used that example as proof of curvature, and denied that it was a fisheye lens that they used to create that illusion, live on the air for everyone to hear. Right. So in the federal school system, we're all taught to laugh at ancient cultures who believed the Earth was a stationary plane, and that's the end of that for most people. It would have been the end of that for me. That's been the end of that for me for over 30 years, up until Revelation, which we're now living through, if you care to believe it or not. That's what it is. Now, we're all filled with government propaganda about NASA and infinite space in order to control our minds in the most fundamental and profound levels. Now, it's very difficult for people to let go of the idea of infinite space and all of that. However, I can assure you such a thing only exists in theory, in science fiction, in our imaginations, all of which has been subliminally suggested and reinforced by propaganda for our entire life. Now, one thing I beg of people looking into this topic for the first time is to leave your presumptions at the door. Trust me, people who are true flat earthers 9 times out of 10 know more about the heliocentric model than you do. And so, it's good to have honest questions, it's good to have honest debates, but, if you try to point to the Coriolis effect or, I don't know, ships going over the horizon, all of these so-called proofs of the spherical Earth have been debunked should you care to look and consider this. Now, I still catch myself assuming heliocentric cosmology, although it is sort of necessary in order to debate this. Even though I realize full well it's a load of garbage, I'll still catch myself sort of often thinking in sort of spherical Earth, infinite space terms. So it is very deeply rooted into our ID, into our subconscious. Now, unfortunately, it's imperative that a flat earther understands the heliocentric model better than the globe heads, which is honestly the norm. Like I said, 9 times out of 10, a flat earther knows more about heliocentrism than your average globe earth proponent. That's normal. Now, globe heads know less about their own model than a well-versed flat earther, and know exactly nothing about the true proofs of the flat earth. So this isn't a debate. This is it's willful ignorance versus science, and the flat earthers are on the side of science. The scientism religious zealots are on the side of ignorance. The point is, the static plane Earth truth comes complete with a working cosmology which is incompatible with the common belief system involving infinite space, big bangs, and galaxies. If you're like me, and you've never been much of a religious person due to the belief that the Bible had everything wrong, starting pretty much from the beginning, I simply ask you to prove all things to yourself, regardless of what you feel others might think of you. And when you realize that the Bible and most ancient religious texts were correct, technically correct, about a geocentric, geostationary model, it may make you want to revisit, these ancient texts. Maybe they knew something we didn't. Now, they could certainly build things that we apparently can't or don't want to, like the pyramids and such. Scientific study and research is a wonderful, shameless, objective method of discernment that is, I love science, if the process is followed properly. Now, we must disallow our emotions and biased preconceptions like the Copernican principle law. We must not allow that sort of thing to get in the way of the pursuit of truth, or at least get in the way of considering the truth or alternate models objectively, and considering the great deception skeptically. Let the data speak for itself and be honest to yourself. Do your own experiments. Prove all things to yourself. Now, by following this process and actually considering the evidence, weighing it out in both models, your only possible outcome is coming closer to the truth one way or another, either by the process of elimination or by simply reinforcing what you already believe. So science, the scientific process certainly isn't going to hurt anyone. Theoretical astrophysics, on the other hand, is a religion which has deceived the entire world, so there is a distinction to be made between science and theoretical astrophysics. In fact, theoretical astrophysics can only be classified as pseudoscience since it cannot be tested, it cannot be repeated, nor falsified. Okay, so the science-denying globeheads out there are doing everything they can to keep regular, honest people from considering the blatant, obvious, overwhelming preponderance of empirical evidence proving a flat, static Earth without axial rotation, without orbital motion, without inverse square curvature, because their model is flimsy and their proofs are flimsy. And in fact, the heliocentric model has been debunked by all of the evidence that's been brought forward and scrutinized over the last couple of years. And we're still finding new things every day. That's the beauty about, dismantling a lie. You'll find all sorts of nuggets in this treasure hunt of debunking the heliocentric model, and every ounce of that evidence always lands to favor the idea or aligns with the idea of a flat stationary Earth. It's as simple as that. Honestly, in terms of evidence, the flat Earth versus globe Earth debate is like Mike Tyson versus Glassjaw Joe or whatever. It's not even a fight. It's not even close. Now, a final claim, which I hope you will research further and not just take my word for it, is this public service announcement, is the fact that orbital mechanics are a physical impossibility in the heliocentric model due to the laws involved, especially considering third-generation satellite bodies such as the Moon or the LISS. Now, I won't attempt to get into much detail in this video, but again, I will put a card to a full playlist covering how orbital mechanics are an impossibility in depth, showing how such orbital relationships are impossible in a system that is constantly changing velocity and angular parabolic paths, even considering, so-called relativity. Orbital mechanics simply do not work in theory when you scrutinize it logically and sometimes with the aid of a computer, which I've done in other videos. Not going to do it in this one, but go ahead and watch the fallacy or the disproving orbital mechanics playlist. You should have fun with that if you're into orbital mechanics. Now, with all that being said, I hope that you have all found this video informative, or at least maybe it will compel you to consider the truth, even though it definitely conflicts with your lifelong held worldview. There are hundreds and hundreds of proofs which show the heliocentric model to be completely false and align with the model of a stationary plane Earth, which has never moved, with the heavenly bodies being a relatively local phenomenon. Now, I realize the incredulity this will bring, to me from you at first. However, that is your programming, and I'm very used to it. Instead of regurgitating what you were taught in science class, which I'm very familiar with, and so are hundreds of others, I hope and pray that you're able to objectively analyze all of the data, or even just a bit of the data. Curvature and axial rotation are pretty simple geometry and physics if you want to know the truth, and come to your own conclusions, but do so unbiasedly, objectively, and skeptically. And the most important thing is to skeptically and objectively analyze the heliocentric model, which is your belief system. I can assure you that there's only one correct answer to this, and it is certainly not a spinning sphere in outer space. Again, check out some of my videos and playlists I've suggested and linked up here, as the proof is certainly there if you care to look with an open mind and check for yourself. Thanks for watching this public service announcement, and real quick, if you'd like to support this channel, you can do so via PayPal to johneLance@gmail.com, TruthMediaRevolution.com, or through fan funding on YouTube on my channel, The Morguile. Thank you all so much. Don't forget to subscribe or resubscribe or resubscribe if you were unsubscribed. Don't forget to ring the bell to ensure that you remain subscribed, hopefully. I was looking through my stats today, and within the last 28 days, I've lost 194 subscribers, many of which I know for a fact is without their knowledge or consent. So just double check and subscribe, and don't forget to ring the bell and check the box. Now, if you've never been subscribed, go ahead and subscribe if you'd like to do so. It really does help me out a lot. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and share it. That helps me out a lot. Now, if you're one of those people who plan to download this video and re-upload it on your channel, taking all the credit for it, I would really appreciate it if you would at least put a link to my channel in the description, as what you're doing is illegal and plagiarism. Now, to me, it's more important that the message gets across to more people. However, you can just as easily add this video, or actually more easily add this video to one of your playlists. It's very simple. Just so you know, if I can't, or if others can't, continue making videos on YouTube thanks to copycats and hacks who refuse to credit the original content creators, eventually you'll have no one to copycat. So, you know, I appreciate people sharing my work, but there's other ways to do it rather than stealing my work and taking credit for it. Or others' work. It's not just me. You know, copycats are out there, and you know, all you YouTube heroes out there, why don't you get to work? You know, do we really want to have 50 instances of the same video on YouTube so that it becomes difficult to find, you know, new content? Because I'm finding it very difficult to find new content. I'm finding new channels hacking and copying old content of lots of different channels that have put stuff out a year ago, and YouTube doesn't seem to care about that. But YouTube's going downhill fast, and I would recommend that you watch my video I made recently called YouTube has gone effing retarded. There is some language in that one. It's a rant. I don't usually do rants. Now, again, I do appreciate people that want to share my work, but you can do so without trying to make money from plagiarizing others' work. Make your own videos, monetize those. You can do it. It's not that hard. You know, maybe I can even help you, you know, show you how to record and edit videos. It takes some time, takes some practice, but once you get it, it's like any other computer program, and things like that. You get used to it, and it becomes easier as you go. Share the videos you like. Create a playlist and share your playlists. Now, if you must re-upload this to your channel, I would really appreciate it if you would please provide a link to my channel in the description and give credit where credit's due. It's hard enough to make ends meet on YouTube as it is, especially after the recent algorithm change in November of 2016, without the hacks and copycats taking credit for work which often takes hundreds of hours for me or other content creators to complete. One example would be my recent 7-hour documentary series, The Globe is Dead. Took hundreds of hours, and you know, I just don't think that you hacks out there and copycats should be stealing that work and peppering 50 ads throughout something like that. That's ridiculous. So anyway, no more ranting. You know, The Globe is Dead series playlist is awesome. Again, it's got 5 videos. It's over 7 hours long. Watch one a day. Then, of course, I've got hundreds of videos on my channel, but another playlist I recommend is the Earth Not a Globe series, which I put out several months ago. There's so many awesome proofs out there that will just blow your mind, but you really have to consider this logically with an open mind. God bless you all. Spread the word, spread the world, and peace. Hello everybody, this is a Globe Earth public announcement from yours truly, John Christopoulos, the Morguile. Good evening friends, subscribers, ladies, gentlemen, and the occasional curious sheeple. No offense to the sheeple, we were all sheeple at some point in our lives, to be fair. The aim of this public service announcement is to give all of you a chance to shed your long-held, rather absurd, illogical belief systems. Please understand that the goal of this announcement is not to change your mind about anything, rather to merely help you or urge you to consider ideas which you may have never considered logically or skeptically or at all. There's no harm in skeptically analyzing a theory. However, it is extremely dangerous to ignore or ridicule new ideas or theories that don't jive with our accepted version of reality. That indeed can be very dangerous and is indeed the opposite of science. Now, I'll give you an example. Before the Wright brothers flew an airplane for the first time about 114 years ago, the general consensus of the flying machine, because we all know only birds were meant to fly, right? So this topic will require you to commit yourself to skeptically and objectively researching, re-examining, reconsidering your belief system about pretty much everything you think you know about theoretical physics, geometry, geology, and ultimately our true place in the universe. However, you must do so from an unbiased position and honestly, skeptically compare data in two opposing models of the world. So, in other words, data can be interpreted in multiple models, and only one of the models can be true or correct. The other one must be wrong. So, the ancient Greeks are often quoted as proving, or cited as proving, the Earth was a sphere thousands of years ago, even though America hadn't been discovered and there were no globes back then. People were thinking about this. Truth be told, they apparently came up with such a theory around 300 BC, but it's important to keep in mind that this theory was certainly not widely believed worldwide or even Greece-wide until millennia later. And the first globe wasn't created until the late 1400s, when Columbus, accidentally discovered America when he was looking for India. And people still to this day call Native Americans, or the different tribes of Native Americans, Indians, right? So the point being is there have been many different models of the world and the celestial lights, also known as the stars and the wandering stars or the planets, and many different versions of each model, which can indeed adequately track so-called orbital patterns of planets based on long-term meticulous astronomical observations, which are assigned mathematical values. But a lot of people get confused and think that the cycles of the heavens are somehow beholden to our mathematical values that we've simply ascribed to the observations. Now, again, for example, like orbital periods of Jupiter, this didn't come from people writing things down on paper to figure it out. It came from long-term, meticulous astronomical observation, documentation, and even confirmation of a repeating cycle. For example, again, the orbital period of Jupiter was tracked and predicted based on a geostationary, geocentric model by multiple astronomers prior to Galileo or Kepler or whoever. Two would be Ptolemy and Aryabhata. One was from Greece, one was from the Middle East, India, I believe. So, finally, if you are a troll in my comments section, which there are tons of you, or maybe a couple of you with tons of accounts, but if you're one of those trolls in my comment section spouting never-ending scientific community, was that it was a laughable waste of time trying to build a flying machine, right? Only birds are meant to fly, duh, you stupid science-denying idiots, you Wright brothers, you. Of course, they lived up to their name, indeed. So the Wright brothers were right. They were correct after all. And it turns out that the science-denying idiots happened to be the majority, if not the entirety, of the scientific community. How ironic is that? Now, that's just one example. There's probably many more that we could point, but just, man flight is a real good one that's, sort of, maybe within the realm of some of your grandparents that are still living. So that's just in the last 114 years, one example of how science was totally wrong, and they mocked and ridiculed actual scientists as science-denying idiots. Sound familiar? Well, that all changed in terms of the scientific community, calling the Wright brothers science-denying idiots, of course, And actual science has launched aviation technology extremely rapidly in such a short period of time. It's truly amazing how fast the entire world's paradigm can change with one single advent, such as manned flight, which we now take for granted. Now, there are tons of other examples where everyone in the world thought an idea was absurd, not worth the time to consider, preposterous folly, only to find out later, sometimes literally overnight, like in the case of the Wright brothers, that they, the scientific community, were 100% incorrect. Now, as you can imagine, this was rather an embarrassment to the entire scientific community at large in terms of the Wright brothers and other examples that you can cite. It's important for you to consider that the modern prevailing overall paradigm of the world and the so-called universe can in fact be shown to be completely misaligned with observable, testable reality. If this is the first time that you've looked into this topic, it's really important to suspend all of the fundamental premises regarding the world and the universe that you may have, just for argument's sake. In order to fall on the right side of history, if for no other reason than due diligence, we must skeptically scrutinize the belief system installed into our subconscious minds via the federally mandated educational curriculum, which is essentially uniform worldwide. Now, I can guarantee you that the revelation that you're about to receive, if you haven't, gotten this yet, this will change the trajectory of your life and of the entire world culture to such a degree that it will make the Wright brothers' advent of aviation totally pale in comparison. So please try not to be one of those people who told the Wright brothers they were science-denying idiots because they were building a flying